of what they were used for, and it's still quite a puzzle and a mystery to historians what function they actually served.
For nearly 200 years, one impossible Roman object has sat behind museum glass under a label that quietly admits the truth. Nobody knows what it is. A hollow bronze shape with 12 faces, strange circular holes, and 20 small knobs placed with mathematical precision. More than 130 of them have been discovered across the ruins of the Roman frontier. And not a single Roman text explains why they existed. That should be impossible. The Roman Empire documented everything: roads, weapons, taxes, engineering manuals, military tools. Even ordinary household devices were carefully recorded by Roman scholars and officials. If Rome built something, Rome wrote about it. But this object was erased so completely that historians still cannot explain its purpose nearly 2,000 years later. Every theory has failed. Candle holder, measuring tool, weapon sight, religious object, toy. One by one, each explanation collapsed under scrutiny. And now, a perfectly preserved specimen recovered from sealed ground in Lincolnshire, England, may have finally revealed the reason these objects vanished from the historical record altogether. Because according to what researchers found, this may not have been an ordinary tool at all. It may have been something Rome never wanted remembered. And before we uncover what was hidden inside the Norton Disney Dodecahedron, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the deeper this investigation goes, the stranger the Roman Empire begins to look. It never appears in Roman records, and that raises a problem historians have struggled to explain for decades. An object this advanced, this costly, and this difficult to manufacture could not have circulated across the Roman world for generations without instructions, regulations, or at least one official document mentioning it somewhere. This was an empire that marked ownership on bricks, coins, weapons, and military supplies. Yet these strange bronze dodecahedrons carry no inscriptions, no measurements, no symbols, and no maker's marks of any kind. That level of silence no longer feels accidental. It feels intentional. Something about these objects appears to have been deliberately removed from history. And the discovery made at Norton Disney may be the clearest sign yet that the silence was never harmless neglect. It may have been concealment, because the way this particular dodecahedron was uncovered is deeply unusual. Most Roman metal artifacts are found in disturbed soil, pulled from plowed farmland, riverbeds, flood zones, or uncovered accidentally by metal detector hobbyists. But the Norton Disney object was recovered under tightly controlled archaeological conditions by the Norton Disney History and Archaeology Group, working alongside professional supervisors. What they found was buried inside what archaeologists call a sealed context. That term is important. It means the surrounding soil had remained untouched from the moment the object was buried nearly 2,000 years ago until the moment excavators uncovered it. No later digging, no flooding, no shifting ground. Nothing disturbed it, which means this object was not dropped accidentally by a traveler or misplaced by a Roman craftsman. It was intentionally placed into the earth, carefully buried alongside pottery fragments and ancient coins, then left behind forever. And the condition of the artifact only makes the mystery harder to explain. The Norton Disney dodecahedron is almost flawless. No cracks, no damage, no signs of being broken apart or melted down for scrap metal. Even the tiny knobs at its corners remain perfectly preserved. Archaeologists described it as looking almost newly made despite spending centuries underground. That matters because bronze in the Roman world was extremely valuable. Damaged bronze objects were routinely melted down and reused for tools, weapons, and fittings. People did not bury expensive bronze items unless there was an extraordinary reason to do so. If someone had hidden it temporarily during war or invasion, they would likely have returned for it later, just as people did with buried coin hoards throughout Roman history. But nobody came back. For nearly 2,000 years, the object remained untouched beneath the soil, which forces an uncomfortable question. Was this really preservation or disposal? Because lowering a perfectly intact object into the ground and abandoning it forever does not look like someone protecting a valuable possession. It looks more like someone trying to remove something dangerous, forbidden, or deeply unwanted. And that leads to the question Roman authorities may never have wanted asked in the first place. Forbidden for what? To answer that, we have to confront a frustrating reality. Almost every practical explanation proposed over the last 2 centuries has completely fallen apart. Researchers have tried to identify the dodecahedron as a candle holder, a knitting device, a merchant's weight, a surveying instrument, a military rangefinder, a portable sundial, a toy, a ritual object, even a coin tester. None of the theories survive close examination. Take the candle holder idea. It became popular after traces of wax were discovered on a few specimens, but the design itself immediately creates problems. The object has openings on every face, meaning melted wax could not realistically collect inside it. More importantly, there are no soot marks, no heat damage, and no discoloration anywhere on the metal, evidence that should exist if flames had burned inside it regularly. Later studies suggested the wax traces likely came from the surrounding soil rather than the object itself. The knitting theory runs into similar problems. Some modern recreations show yarn can be looped around the knobs to create small woven tubes, but Roman textile workers mainly used a method called nail binding, which relied on a single needle and thread rather than a device like this. And if these objects had been used constantly by hand, microscopic wear should be visible along the edges and knobs. But researchers found none. No polishing, no abrasion, no trapped fibers, nothing. And then the mystery becomes even stranger. The theories involving surveying, range-finding, or coin measurement all collapse for the same reason: lack of standardization. A military measuring device must follow strict dimensions to work accurately, yet no 2 Roman dodecahedrons are identical. The hole sizes vary wildly, not only between different objects, but even within the same object itself. There is no consistent ratio, no universal pattern, and no evidence of calibration anywhere. There are no alignment markers, no fixed reference axis, nothing that would allow the object to function as a precision instrument. And that becomes a serious problem for the theories claiming it was used for surveying or military calculations. The Romans already possessed a perfectly documented surveying device known as the groma. It appears in Roman texts, Roman artwork, and even inside the tombs of surveyors identified by engraved memorial stones. The dodecahedron appears nowhere beside it. No manuals, no illustrations, no technical descriptions, nothing. The same issue destroys the coin testing theory. Roman coin gauges relied on standardized openings, carefully matched to official coin sizes. But the 12 openings on the dodecahedron are wildly inconsistent. Their diameters do not correspond to known Roman currency standards, and there is no evidence they were designed for measurement at all. Then comes the sundial explanation. That fails immediately because the object lacks the basic components required for telling time. There is no gnomon to cast a shadow, no engraved hour markings, no calibrated angles, Nothing about the structure behaves like a functioning timepiece. One by one, every practical explanation collapses. It cannot reliably contain liquid. It cannot accurately measure distance. It shows no signs of repeated handling or mechanical use. It is hollow, covered in openings, completely inconsistent in design. And despite all of that, it required enormous skill and expense to create. So eventually the question changes. The mystery is no longer, what did this object do? The mystery becomes, what was it designed to avoid touching? Because the answer may not lie in the object itself. It may lie in where these things were hidden. When archaeologists mapped the locations of every known Roman dodecahedron, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. At first, researchers dismissed it as coincidence, but once the distribution is laid out clearly, it becomes impossible to ignore. These objects are almost completely absent from the center of Roman civilization. None have been discovered in the Italian heartland. They rarely appear in Spain. They are missing from wealthy eastern provinces like Egypt and Syria. They do not cluster around the great workshop cities of the empire, major administrative capitals, or heavily documented military centers. Instead, nearly every known specimen appears along the empire's northern frontier: Britannia, Gaul, Germania, the outer edges of Roman control. These were regions where Roman law existed side by side with older belief systems that refused to disappear. Celtic traditions, indigenous rituals, and Druidic spiritual practices continued beneath the surface long after Roman occupation began. And suddenly, the map starts looking less like trade distribution and more like a boundary line between two worlds. But the locations become even stranger when you examine exactly where within those regions the objects were buried. Dodecahedrons are rarely recovered from crowded Roman settlements or wealthy villas. Instead, they tend to appear near ancient burial grounds, shallow river crossings, wells, forest edges, and isolated boundary zones. To the Roman mind, those places may have looked ordinary, but in many pre-Roman belief systems, especially Celtic traditions, these locations carried spiritual significance. Rivers, graves, and wilderness boundaries were seen as liminal spaces, thresholds where the barrier between the living world and the unseen world became thin, places where contact with something beyond ordinary reality was believed possible. And before we go any further, I want to say something directly to you. This channel exists to uncover the pieces of history that were ignored, buried, or quietly erased. The Norton Disney excavation brought one forgotten object back into the light after nearly 2,000 years underground. But there are countless others still hidden in storage rooms, buried beneath fields, or sitting behind museum labels that admit far less than they pretend to know. So if you want more investigations like this, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below telling me which historical mystery we should uncover next. Every new subscriber helps push these forgotten stories back into public view. Now, back to the frontier, because this geographic pattern connects directly to the silence in the Roman records. The Roman Empire carefully documented tools, engineering devices, and military equipment, but it also imposed strict punishments against unsanctioned spiritual practices. Laws such as the Lex Cornelia targeted acts associated with magic, divination, and communication with the dead. In some cases, the penalties were severe enough to include execution. Roman authorities even launched military campaigns against Druidic priesthoods in Britannia. One of the most infamous examples was the destruction of the Druidic stronghold on the island of Anglesey during the 1st century. And once you place all the evidence together, the pattern begins pointing in a single direction: the missing inscriptions. the absence of wear marks, the careful burials near graves and rivers, the concentration along the northern frontier. None of it resembles an ordinary household tool. Instead, it begins to look like an object hidden away from public view, brought out only briefly for rituals or practices that Roman authorities considered dangerous or forbidden. Used in darkness, used in isolated sacred places, then hidden again before anyone in power could find it. And that leaves one final question, buried at the bottom of the excavation. What exactly was sealed inside the Norton Disney Dodecahedron before the earth closed over it for the last time? Because this is the point where the story stops feeling like ordinary archaeology and starts looking more like a forensic investigation. After the Norton Disney object was recovered from its untouched burial layer, it was transferred to a laboratory for advanced testing techniques that simply did not exist a few decades ago. Throughout late 2024 and into 2025, researchers examined the specimen alongside several other well-preserved dodecahedrons discovered near similar frontier regions. Using mass spectrometry and isotope analysis, scientists focused not on the exterior surface, but on the microscopic organic traces trapped deep within the porous bronze interior for nearly 2,000 years. And the results changed everything. The lab did not detect ordinary dirt contamination, it did not uncover textile fibers, metal shavings, or evidence of mechanical use. Instead, the chemical residue revealed traces of stearic acid, a processed form of animal fat altered by intense heat, combined with pine resin and lavender oil. That combination immediately stood out. Historically, those materials are strongly associated with ritual burning, purification smoke, funerary practices, and embalming traditions found in Iron Age and Romano-Celtic cultures. But the most disturbing discovery came next. Researchers identified significant concentrations of calcium phosphate mixed with microscopic carbon particles. Further isotope testing pointed toward a very specific source, cremated human bone. And according to the analysis, these were not accidental traces from surrounding soil or nearby burials. The chemical signature matched bone material exposed to sustained high-temperature burning alongside organic fats, conditions consistent with Iron Age and early Roman cremation practices. In other words, this object had not simply been buried near the dead, it had been used directly with the remains of dead humans. For many of the researchers involved, that realization completely overturned decades of harmless explanations. Years of speculation about measuring devices, candle holders, knitting tools, and military instruments suddenly collapsed under a single laboratory report. One investigator reportedly admitted that excavating the object had been unsettling enough, but reading the chemistry results afterward was something else entirely, because the Roman dodecahedron no longer looked like a tool. It looked like a device designed for ritual combustion involving human remains, and that creates a massive contradiction with what historians believed about Roman and Celtic funerary customs. Both cultures treated cremated remains with extreme care. Ashes and bone fragments were usually collected after cremation and sealed inside tightly enclosed urns made from pottery or glass. Protecting the remains from wind, moisture, and disturbance was considered spiritually important. But the dodecahedron does the exact opposite. It is open on every side. 12 circular holes lead directly into the hollow center. If ashes, fats, and aromatic materials were placed inside, the structure would not preserve them at all. Even a slight current of air could carry material outward through the openings, which means the design was never intended to contain the dead. It was designed to release something from inside. And suddenly, the question changes again. Why would anyone place cremated human remains into an object specifically engineered to let smoke, scent, and ash escape into the surrounding air? This is where the mystery becomes even darker, because the contradiction only starts making sense when you stop thinking of the openings as decorative holes and start seeing them as part of an airflow system. One of the most unexpected clues came from a surviving monastic tradition preserved in a 12th century Latin manuscript discovered in a remote European monastery. Historians long dismissed the passage as medieval folklore, but its description is difficult to ignore. The manuscript refers to a sacred sphere pierced across 12 faces and crowned at its points, allegedly used by local priests to hear the voices of those who sleep within stone. On its own, the text proves nothing. It is not contemporary Roman evidence. But when that description is compared with the chemistry found inside the Norton Disney object and the unusual geometry of the dodecahedron itself, a disturbing possibility begins to emerge. This may never have been a storage container at all. It may have functioned as a carefully engineered combustion chamber. The geometry suddenly matters. The varying hole sizes across different faces are not random decoration. In modern airflow physics, structures like this can regulate oxygen intake and control the movement of heated gases. When combustible fat, resin, and microscopic ash particles burn inside a hollow chamber like this, the differently sized openings influence how air enters and exits the structure. Some openings pull oxygen inward to sustain combustion. Others force heated smoke outward under pressure. That means the dodecahedron may have been intentionally designed to release concentrated streams of smoke, carrying scent, ash, and heat into the surrounding environment, rather than dispersing them randomly. And then, another detail becomes impossible to ignore. Those small, spherical knobs positioned at every corner of the object may not have been decorative at all. They elevate the dodecahedron slightly above the surface beneath it, allowing air to circulate continuously underneath the structure. The knobs were not ornaments. They were supports, part of the breathing system itself. Now imagine this object in the kind of environment where it may actually have been used: a sealed ritual chamber, a cave, a dark enclosure, a burial site with only a narrow opening for ventilation, while smoke slowly escaped through the 12 openings into the darkness around it. Place the dodecahedron in the middle of the chamber, light the mixture inside it. Then stop for a second and think about what happens next. This is not an ordinary flame. As the animal fat burns alongside resin and microscopic human remains, smoke begins moving through the object in controlled patterns. Instead of drifting randomly through the air, it is guided by the structure itself, forced through the 12 openings in spiraling streams. The fire inside throws moving pentagonal shadows across the walls, while the chamber slowly fills with heat, scent, and ash. And suddenly, the purpose of the object starts to look very different. The ritual was never simply about honoring the dead. It may have been about releasing them. If you made it all the way to the end of this investigation, then you're probably someone who prefers the hidden side of history over the polished version carved into marble statues. So subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and tell me in the comments which forgotten artifact we should investigate next, because there are still objects buried beneath museums, archives, and ancient soil that official history has never fully explained.